President Biden visited the city of his birth, Scranton, Pennsylvania, to promote his economic agenda. He spoke about the benefits for the middle class included in his infrastructure plan as Democrats near a deal on social and climate investments. Lawmakers are pushing for an agreement on the massive spending plan by the end of the week, but compromises will likely come as a major cost to the president's original $3.5 trillion vision. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Jiang joins me now to talk more about this. Hi there, Weijia. So as of now, what are some of the items that are likely to be cut from this social spending plan, and what is staying in?
So, Lana, the most important thing right now is that they've had to scale back. And President Biden set new expectations with lawmakers who he met with yesterday to say that the final bill would probably be a price tag of about $1.75 to $1.9 trillion, which, as you mentioned, is significantly lower than the $3.5 trillion that was initially proposed, and certainly lower than the $6 trillion that progressives have wanted. And so they've had to move pieces around, and we do know that what will likely stay in the bill is free universal pre-K, along with an extension of the child tax credit for 1 year, even though many Democrats had hoped that that would stick around for 4 years. And then, other things that have to give, probably the president's plan to provide free tuition for community college is probably not going to make it in there. And then other items will not last as long as they originally hoped. For example, paid leave for families. We're talking about 4 weeks now instead of the 12 weeks that the president had hoped for. But the White House is really careful about confirming any of these details because obviously the negotiations are ongoing. One thing that is significant, though, Lana, is that we know little details about the climate change piece of this. It's not just a social network package we're talking about. Many of the president's main proposals to fight climate change is baked into this, and it seems like there's not going to be a clean energy plan in this package, and that is the main vehicle to achieve the president's goals to cut pollution in the next several years. And so I think, he's going to have a difficult time explaining that to other world leaders when he goes to a huge climate summit next month. But they are still optimistic that they're going to get this thing passed.
So I hear you, Weijia. We don't know for sure what's going to be in and what's going to be out, but particularly as you're discussing the climate aspect of it, might we see these eliminated items come back in other legislation down the line?
Sources here think that's probably what's going to have to happen because it's difficult to imagine how you can achieve all of the president's goals with regard to fighting pollution and reducing the carbon footprint without these measures that are in this bill. And so eventually they're going to have to go at it again. But I think the president is stressing right now that the need for compromise is imminent and that he's really trying to get this over the finish line. So even if he can't have everything, he'd rather have something, especially looking ahead to the midterm elections, which aren't that far away. I mean, there's already a lot of concern about how many seats Democrats will be able to hold on to overall. And so this will certainly be an important win for the party as they try to maintain control of both chambers.
Speaking of holding on to seats, West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin is pushing back after a report claimed that he was thinking about leaving the Democratic Party. Explain what's going on and remind our viewers why Manchin is such a key figure, not only in spending talks, but for everything that's happening in the Senate.
So Joe Manchin responded directly to this report, and he said it is BS without using that shorthand. And, it's not that Joe Manchin is special and that he has more power than any of the other senators. It's that they have such a slim majority that every single senator has to be on board when they're trying to pass any legislation through this process called reconciliation that does not require a single Republican vote. And he has been, not only when it comes to this package, but even during the time when the president was trying to pass the massive COVID relief measure, he's been the one that has resisted and has threatened to be a de facto sector. And so, he's always talking about big spending and how he wants to make sure that there are checks in place so that, the government doesn't balloon up its spending too much. But he is the one that usually is holding things back. And that's why he has the power here. Because if any of these senators were to say this in the way that Joe Manchin has many, many times, they would be just as important. And they all are, to be clear. I mean, they all have an equal vote, and that's why it's so important, because it is split right down the middle, that they cannot afford to lose anybody.
Right, and Manchin, Senator Manchin, has really been probably more than anyone else the Democratic senator who has given the Democratic Party and President Biden the most difficulty in advancing that agenda. Let's also talk about the Senate Republicans blocking Democrats from advancing a revised voting rights bill on Wednesday. Speaking of that very narrow margin, and in this case, this was something that Democrats needed Republican support for, and they didn't have it. So what's President Biden saying about this?
Right. So on matters like voting rights or immigration or gun control, Democrats can't use that process that we just talked about, reconciliation, because that can only be applied if it's something having to do with the budget. Obviously, voting rights is not that. And so they have to do it the traditional way, which means getting through a filibuster, which means, having a vote just to bring the piece of legislation to the floor. And that's not happening. And so today, the White House press secretary, Jen Psaki, said that, look, there's really only one way to do this, to really change the way voting rights are protected in America, and that is through Congress. So she expressed a lot of frustration. She asked a lot of questions like, what is it that Republicans are so afraid of? And even before this happened, the president issued a statement expecting this. He said it is urgent. Democracy, the very soul of America, is at stake. And then he said, but Senate Republicans are likely to block even debate on the bill, which is exactly what happened. So this is no surprise to the White House. They've expressed how frustrated they are and how they wish it wouldn't be this way. But other than that, and other than trying again, there's not much that they can do, that the president can do with executive power to change it.
And Weijia, before I let you go, as you're well aware, parents across the country are thinking about the pediatric vaccine, looking there at the White House. And as we said earlier, the administration just unveiled its plan to vaccinate young children against COVID-19. What more can you tell us about the logistics of this rollout?
So I think it's really important for parents to know that it is not yet approved for children between the ages of 5 and 11, but the White House anticipates it will be in the next week or so. And so when that happens, they want to be ready to go, which is why they unveiled this logistical plan that you mentioned today, so parents are aware of what's going to happen. There will not be these mass vaccination sites that we saw with adults. Instead, the administration is working closely with pediatric and primary care offices, hundreds of community health centers and rural health clinics, as well as thousands of pharmacies to administer the shot. So they're really trying to reach out to every sort of partner that they can, so that when the green light is given by the FDA and ultimately the CDC, that children will be able to get their shots right away, because they do believe this is really key to getting us out of the pandemic.
And a big logistical lift that we're all watching for. Weijia, thank you so much.
Sure.